I got mail. This showed up today in the mail. It says Emil Media on the envelope. That means Squidmar Miniatures has sent me another challenge. Let's see what's in the envelope. Nothing. Okay. So we got a squig here, I think. This is from the Gloomspite Gitz warband for Shadespire. Okay, so it's a small squig with a bone in its mouth. I know I have received an email also with some kind of instructions for this. So I'm gonna have to read that and just to know what I'm gonna do. I have no idea. It's a squig. Cool. Yeah. Let's see what the email contains and get on with this challenge. Well, if you read the email from Emil, you will see that this is an insane warband down in Shadespire. They consumed a lot of mushrooms and they stink and they hate black. That's what I brought with me from the email. It's a lot of text, but I thought, why not tell a little story with this project. A squig isn't normally black, so I can ignore the black part. I just think I'll choose other parts of the mail to be creative with, since that was the challenge. Be creative. So I thought I'd be creative mostly with the setting. I think the squig will be kind of what a squig normally is. It's going to be red, and I'm going to do stuff with it to make it look a bit stinky. But mostly it's going to be the weird, lonely, insane setting that's going to be the part. So I made a quite a big base for this miniature, almost a diorama. I got some flack over the base for my latest challenge. I made it quite a boring base for the intercessor, so I thought I'd make a funnier base this time. So I think a dwarf mine part of the Shadespire city is going to be the setting for this base. So I chose some old plaster rock molds and some gravel and dwarven bits I had lying around in the bits box. And I went about making quite a big base for a very small squig. The story is he's lost his mind completely and he's wandering around in the mines aimlessly, just searching for mushrooms and something to eat, anything. Even his former teammates or warband mates in the goblin warband, so they stay clear of him because he smells so bad that even they don't want to go near him, and they really risk being eaten by him if they cross his path. So just a lot of gravel and bits on this base, and then on to painting. I sprayed it Mechanica Standard Grey and then went over with a black primer that I shaded the darker recesses with the airbrush, and just to create some interesting texture on these rocky parts. I started with kind of a zenithal shade and then went over with the light gray primer that I highlighted all the rocky parts with to create a smooth kind of a damp feeling. And then I went over with some rust paint to create the red streaks that are often found on rocks. And rocks aren't just gray, they are lots of colors. So I chose some rusty brown and kind of a light green here to create some color variations, and then a brown tone for the gravel and dirt in the creases and the crevices of the rocks, just to create kind of a interesting and kind of a hallucinogenic feel to this space. I imagine this is how the squig sees it. I went back with the grey primer again and highlighted the rocks just to bring the colors down a little bit, not to make it completely insane. Then I dry brushed everything with some grey craft paint, just acrylic craft paint, and then some pure white, just to bring everything together and just make it blend in. Gave the skulls on the base a wash of skeleton horde contrast paints, and I dry brushed all the bronze parts with Balthasar gold, which I think is a good base paint for gold and bronze parts. In this case it's mostly bronze, since it's dwarven equipment it's going to be just steel and bronze. The same with the steel parts, dry brush them with lead belcher just to give them a quick metal finish. When you do this you don't have to be too careful, because it's going to be covered with a lot of grime, rust and verdigris and dust, so you can cut some corners when painting stuff on the base. I painted the coal or the rock and coal and gold on the cart there with some black contrast paint, and then dry brushed the metal parts with Runefang steel, and then shaded everything with my favorite metal mix. It's Black Templar and Nuln Oil. No, this is just Nuln Oil actually this time. Or if it's might have been actually Agrix Earthshade. I don't remember. Went over the bronze parts with verdigris. It's Nihilok oxide. I think that's a really good special effect paint for creating verdigris on bronze. So just I diluted with some water and then just paint over in the deepest recesses and where I see fit. And then I just thinned down some Joker orange and mixed it with some Vallejo rust wash, and paint over the recesses and where I want rust to be on the metal parts. On the card I chose some rocks that I thought would be nice to have in gold, so as the dwarves actually found something before they were slaughtered by whoever ruined their cave. Probably goblins and squigs and trolls. And I just painted these with Balthasar gold and highlighted them with Retributor gold and Runefang steel to get a nice shiny gold effect here. I wanted those to pop a little bit from the coals and rocks that are in the cart. The cart was then covered in really grimy, dirty wash made out of typhus corrosion and water, and I just smeared that all over it to create a texture and a really dirty look. Almost all of the metal parts were covered in some way with this mix, and I think it looks good as kind of a muddy feel to it. I think this cart was just pushed from the rails further away and just pushed down into this ravine where it fell down through mud puddles and stuff like that. The gems on the shields were painted with warpstone glow and highlighted with moot green, and then krieg khaki as a final little shiny highlight on the tip of the gem there, just to create some light showing there. The card was further dirtied with the rust mix I used previously on the axe and the pickaxe and stuff. Just liberal amount of rust here. Just cover where you want and move it around with the wet brush till you're happy with it. Really can't almost can't overdo it. Just making it really dirty. I mean, the card isn't the focal point of this diorama, so it can be really subdued. Skulls were highlighted with Baneblade Brown and some Rackhearth flesh, and then Pallid Witch flesh, which I think are good for kind of a brownish skull, not too cold in the tone. I think it looks kind of good. Then the card was just stippled with some lead belcher or room fan steel, just whatever metal paint you want, just to bring back some of the shine where some of the rust has been chipped off and the metal can be visible again, just to break up the dirty parts. Then the squig, I gave it a spray of Mephiston red, and then I highlighted with some Vallejo Air paint. The color is Rust. It's a nice orange that I thought would be nice for a first layer. Just picking out the top parts, and then I moved on with some more and more yellow paint, just to give it a really bright starting point. I'm gonna shade this down a lot, but this is a good start for warm yellow. Almost went almost to white here with the more and more light paints. The belly got a spray of some tan paints, just lighter and lighter colors, almost up to white here too. I think having a different color on the belly gives it a nice color change here, and creates a more interesting figure. It's not totally a unique way of painting squigs, but I like it. So I just took my time and aimed carefully just to get the highlights right. It's easy to overspray and get really bad results if you have too high pressure on the airbrush, or if you pull the needle back too far. But if you're kind of careful and always test spray on your thumb or something before, so that would give a good result. And on the painting table, I just went over the whole model with some Blood Angels contrast paint diluted with contrast medium, like 50-50, and I used that mix to cover the whole model, and then went over with the undiluted contrast paint and further enhanced the shadows in the deepest recesses, and wherever I wanted it, on the lower parts and the recesses and around all the warts and boils across his skin. Just deepening the red as I go, and using a damp brush to remove paint where I got it by mistake. That's a good thing about contrast paint. As I said before, you can remove it if you're fast enough. And I moved on to Flesh Terrors red contrast paint, and further just deepen the shadows. I find this way to be very good with shading. Some people like to start very dark and then just highlight up, but I like to start at the mid-tone and go down and then highlight up. The belly was highlighted with some pallid witch flesh, just painting some lines to enhance the folds of the skin. It's a very light part, so you don't have to push the highlights too far, but I think this stage was enough for now. So just dilute it with water and that'll be kind of good. The further shading was done with some purple paint here to bring some cold colors into the mix. I think red is nice to just bring some kind of blue paint into the shadows, just to bring some interest here, and it looks kind of natural. The first highlight here was with Wild Rider Red, since the base coat is so light with the contrast paint. You can skip a few highlight stages, so I went straight to Wild Rider Red, and then I think squig orange and some skin tones was added later, but the contrast paint create kind of a natural first highlight, so you can leave it there if you want kind of a tabletop model, but if you want to push it further, it's kind of easy just to bring it up with highlights, but you don't have to do all the stages. Acadian flesh tone and Kislev flesh was used as the final highlights for the skin, and just hitting the outmost parts of the model and where the light would hit naturally, and just thinner and thinner lines around the edges, like on this moon burn. It seems like he has a burn mark from his former masters. I think there's a goblin with this moon on the end of a spear that he burn marks all the squigs with. And just keep on hitting those extreme highlight points with smaller and smaller lines and dots of your lighter and lighter highlight color. This is the Kislev flesh stage, where I think I stopped. You can go further if you want, but I think that was enough. I glazed the whole model with some Flesh Terrors contrast paint mixed with a lot of contrast medium, just to make a thin glaze, and I just paint that all over, and then went back with some final highlights again with the Kislev flesh, just to make the edges and the extreme highlights pop. The glazing is not always necessary, but I thought the red needed to be punched up a little bit again. The teeth was base coated with Baneblade Brown to give them a nice starting point. And then the thought was to have the stinky part of the squig manifested in his teeth, and I thought, how do stinky teeth look? Well, they look really yellow. So I went back and I covered the teeth with a little yellow brown paint. I don't remember which one it is, but more of a yellow tone to give it kind of a, I don't know, really disgusting yellow hue that I further enhanced by washing it with Nasdreg yellow contrast paint mixed with contrast medium, and the bone parts were painted with Steel Legion drab and washed with Agrax Earthshade. I highlighted the teeth with more bone colors than what I did. The bone actually was kind of the same mix that I painted the skulls on the base. It's I'm gonna highlight with Baneblade Brown and Rakoth flesh and Pallid Witch flesh, but the teeth I went with the bone colors for highlighting the yellow, since they have a warmer tone. I went over with Ushabti Bone and Screaming Skull here. I think that's a good highlight for yellow if you wanted to have kind of warm tone but not be yellow. I don't want it to look like Imperial Fist armor here. So those bone colors actually look very good on the teeth, and I washed a little bit of yellow over the final highlights to bring them down, and the teeth were done. And like I said, Baneblade brown and Rakarth flesh and some Pallid Witch flesh on the big bone in his mouth. The gums were painted here with some purple tones, pink tones. I think it's Screamer Pink and Emperor's Children I used to give it a little bit of difference from the skin tones around the mouth. There's a lot of red tones here, so just really try to separate them to not make the model too uniform. And I think purple and red looks kind of good together here, so brings a bit of a cold tone into the model also to separate it from the warm red. And when highlighting these very smooth shapes of the bones, just keep your paints diluted and glaze up the highlights, just moving to a smaller area the lighter paint you use. Just really don't use too much paint on the brush, and many layers instead of painting just big chunks. This extreme highlight was actually used on the teeth also and on the eyes. I think it's Pallid Witch flesh with a great off-white paint. And the eyes were glazed with some Terradon turquoise to bring them out. And then I was gonna varnish the figure, and disaster strikes. Yeah, the model fell down full of varnish down into the spraying booth and caught all the spray dust that gathered over the years and totally ruined the model. I was not happy about this. I was really not happy about this, but fortunately I had another squig lying around, the exact same model actually, so I repainted it, and that took a while, not just a few minutes, but here it is. As you can see, I changed a few things when painting it the second time. I painted the lips in the purple color here and the gums in a more very dark purple, just to bring it out, and I upped the highlights all over the model and just learned from the mistakes from the previous paint job. That's what you should do if you fail. Don't see it as a failure, see it as a chance to do something better the next time, and that's what I tried. I think this squig actually turned out a lot better than the first one, so I'm happy in the end. I added some mushrooms. So you can see I found some on a sprue from some squig hunters I had, squig hoppers. So I added a few mushrooms since I thought that was missing on the base, and I painted those also. And that's my insane squig. I hope Emil thinks I was being creative. I think a lot of people are gonna paint these miniatures very grimy and disgusting and dark, and I went another way. I wanted to tell the story of the insane squig bounding around in the dwarven caves, just looking for food and more magic mushrooms to feed his insane addiction, you could say. And I hope this is to his taste, and looking forward to what he's gonna say about it. I'm always nervous when doing these things, and I hope you like this tutorial, and failure and success again.